So, welcome to Storytelling on the Plains, where we kind of screw everything up all the time. So, Connor, you have a whole bunch of paper in front of you.
I do.
I wrote a two-part episode. And in the midst of switching between my old job and my new job, I wrote this and haven't looked at it in a few weeks, and I don't know, I think I might have done something wrong. It covers some things that we've talked about again or before, but I wanted to do some more detail on how people got here and go into some more detail, so I think it was inevitable that we're going to cover some of the same tracks in that. So, you know, you can just stop me and be like, dude, we already talked about that. And I might go, but wait, there's more, you know, and then I can be, you know, that, who was that guy that did the infomercials and everything he sold to you? He was like, but wait, there's more. And then he would sell you more crap. And I can't remember his name now.
I remember like Bob Vila.
No, it wasn't Bob Vila, but I can see the guy's face and he's dead now, so whatever. You know, I can't.
Or Billy Mays.
That's it, Billy Mays.
Yeah, Billy Mays.
I mean, hopefully I didn't do it wrong, because if I did stuff wrong, then you're just going to have to yell at me and interrupt a few times. And I wrote this as a two-parter, so it's either a two-part really big screw up or it'll work out okay. And I know I emailed this to you about 3 weeks ago, just before I started my new job, and I didn't get a chance to look at it till this morning, and then I thought, oh my god, I think I screwed something up. So, you know, if I did, that's the life of Irene. She makes screw ups and we just try to make the best of what I screw up. So if you're okay with that, we can start talking about how people got here.
I'm curious. How did people get here?
Well, you know what? They came in UFOs. They just plucked them out of New York and D.C. and Boston, and they just dropped them. They just randomly dropped them off in western Nebraska.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the end of our story, folks. Hope you enjoy.
Oh gosh, and the only reason I got UFOs stuck in my head is I finally got Paul to watch the new Beavis and Butthead movie, and I'm sad and pathetic. I'm an almost 53-year-old woman, and I like Beavis and Butthead.
My parents didn't allow me to watch that when I was a kid. Oh. Yeah, that was a no-no.
Oh, see, next time I see your mom, I'm going to have to hurt her.
Yeah, that was considered very trashy TV at the time.
Yeah, my mom thought so too, but I was in my 20s, and in college, so she couldn't stop me.
That was fair, yeah. I was not in my 20s. I remember MASH, a lot of MASH.
Oh, I watched a ton of MASH.
That was
still
MASH
one of my
Star
favorite
Trek.
shows.
Yep.
MASH covered all the bases: comedy, drama. It went everywhere, explored pretty much every topic out there. The only episode I can't watch is the last episode, you know, the thing with the chicken. People just need to say Hawkeye and the chicken. I'm like, I'm done. Let's move on.
I did not. I don't think.
It's really, really good. It's really well done. It's well acted. It really plays into, you know, how your mind can mess with you like that.
It's kind of like the thing, you never look up the lyrics to the theme song of MASH. Like, just don't look up the lyrics, because it's just like kind of disturbing. Yeah. When you start to, it's like, wow.
Just knowing the title of that song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never, again, we're going completely off topic.
So of course. But that's us.
Oh, I did grow up with a little MASH, and I was curious in my older days, why did they ever pick that particular theme song for it? I'm sure there's a good reason why. I don't know.
I know the story's out there, and I don't remember it correctly, but I know the guy just wrote it really quickly as well. But
and it's for MASH?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It wasn't written before.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But it's yeah.
Now from the Korean War back to
Nebraska in the 1800s. So, well, you know what? It all has to do with people. So I'm going to say it's on topic. And I don't care. You know why I don't care, Connor?
Why?
Because it's our podcast, and we can talk about whatever we want to talk about. Yeah. And we can go down whatever rabbit hole we want to go down. And if people want to go with us, they can. And if not, they can just, fast forward and hope that we got back on track. Yeah. But if they listen, they know we go off track often enough, they should probably just stay with us.
You need to comment more, people, if you guys got a problem with this.
Yeah. I always get comments from one of our Patreons. It's the same Patreon every week. Always with a thumbs up or really nice, or, there's always nice, good, positive comments. So at least we're pleasing one Patreon. We just need to get that one Patreon to, support us with what, 60 grand a year, 60, 70 grand a year? I'll take it.
So for that rich Patreon that has nothing else better to do in this world with their money other than give it to us.
That rich Patreon that pays us $7 a month.
There you go. 7,000. You can screw up a few zeros and a comma.
Yeah, we're okay with that. And it's by month. I did get an email the other day from Patreon to do it per episode, and I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of scamming people.
Don't talk bad about Patreon. They'll take us off.
Yeah. But I mean, they're perfectly fine with you doing it however you want to do it. I feel like I'm scamming other people. That I set this up as $357 a month to then change it to $357 per episode, which means you're paying 4 times what you agreed to.
Yeah, and we appreciate all our Patreon listeners and people who contribute. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And before we get started here today, I was just about to get started, but I just give you all a warning. If you hear Connor or I try not to scream, it's because Londo is in the room and he likes to put his claws on our legs. So that might happen today, and that's okay because Londo's part of our podcast too. So to get started on our episode today, the peopling of the area that's known as Western Nebraska didn't begin with the homesteaders who traveled here, and that's kind of where people learn about the history, is you start with the people that came out and homesteaded here. Again, Connor, I don't think I told you, but I had a wicked sinus infection this week.
Oh, you did mention
it. It's clearing up, so I might clear my throat a bit, and I might be lazy again this week. You were sick last week. I'm a little under the weather this week, so I might be lazy again and do minor editing. So my coughing's gonna stay in the episode, and people will just have to deal with it. So the peopling in the area really started here with the Native Americans. They were living and thriving here. And they argued amongst themselves, amongst the other tribes, before the white man ever decided to set foot in the prairies of the Great Plains. And many times we forget that or gloss over it so that we can teach about the folks who traveled across the trails headed west with a hope of a better future. Sometimes this is deliberate, and sometimes it's because there are few written documents of what the Native Americans were doing. And often when you find them, they're written by white men from a white man's perspective. And, in case you didn't know, Connor, you and I are white.
I'm not white. I'm clear.
So by default, whatever we say about Native Americans is from our perspective. We can learn and understand different Native American tribes, but they are always going to have a different viewpoint than we have. Just like you and I can talk about the same things, but you're always going to have a male viewpoint. I'm always going to have a female viewpoint. Yes. But we try to understand so we can all reach a consensus. But the truth is, for a very long time, Native American history was only oral history. So while I can see where it's easier for someone to teach history from what's written down, it also leaves a hole because you don't have that missing element of the people who lived and experienced a particular point in history. And the Native Americans really didn't have that necessity. We're the ones that write everything down and document everything. So everything comes out from the white person's point of view. So what's even sadder is we as white people did that to them, and we destroyed their way of life for our own personal greed. So we get told that little happy story of the immigrants moving west, going on the trails. And you always kind of leave out, hey, there were already people in this area that hunted in this area, and we're just not going to teach about them. We're going to teach about the cool trails. And the trails are very cool. It's really cool, interesting history. Yes. But we often block stuff out. And in New York, I learned mostly about the Iroquois and the tribes in the southern part of New York. I grew up about an hour and a half north of New York City. So I learned about those trails and trails of those tribes. And when I moved out here, I learned all about the Lakota and the Cheyenne and the Arapaho and all the other tribes. But you concentrate on the tribes that were in the area you grew up in when you're learning it in school. Yeah. And if you think about it, when you went to school here, you probably didn't learn much about the Iroquois.
Well, actually, what I learned, it was very one-sided, very, very, jaded. I don't know if jaded is the word, or a certain perspective that definitely isn't necessarily correct. But, like around the time Disney came out with Pocahontas.
Right.
So from that, you kind of learned that everybody out in the East was all kind of singing and dancing. And like, they were the natives that were the peaceful ones. Whereas the further you go out West, it all became cowboys, cowboys and Indians. It all became... if you heard about the Oregon Trail, it all became about wagon circles, circling your wagons to protect yourselves from invasion. It was very, very like that. You understood natives here to be very violent, very aggressive, not hostile. Whereas you go further out east, and we were taught about how New York came about and how there was a lot of agreements along the east side with many of the settlers to make America work, because there was. And then, of course, you learn about the French and Indian War. And then but it just always seemed the further you went west, everything went violent when you went west. Yeah. Like everybody threw everything down, and it wasn't just natives, it was white people too. It was civilized New York and the wild, wild West, right? When you get past that point, and people, even white people, became barbaric. Everybody was carrying guns. Everybody was drinking. There were saloons and brothels everywhere.
And the reality is it wasn't like that. And in the West, they even had stricter gun laws than we have today.
They did.
But you're right. I learned the same thing. Everybody, all the Native Americans on the East Coast were all happy, loved to help the white man out, and they were all savages the farther west you went.
Just went all downhill the further west you went.
Yeah, and that wasn't true either, but that was the viewpoint that they taught. So while I don't sit around and feel guilty for being white, I think there's still a responsibility for us to acknowledge what happened and to make efforts to change. And my Lakota friend, and you used to work with her as well at our previous job, she told me a few months ago that I know more about her history than she does. And I just felt really bad about that, because she should know more, but I also understand why she doesn't know more. And I didn't really know what to say to her, because I really felt honored that she thinks of me like that I'm a good source of information for history for her own people. But I'm also really sad, because it's her history, and that knowledge never should have been taken away from her, and it should have never been taken away from her parents and her grandparents. And I mean, that's what we did to them. And I don't feel guilty about being a white person, but I also acknowledge that, I can't say it was one of my answers, but some white people in the past did that to them and destroyed their culture. So I always kind of feel a necessity and a responsibility to share what I learned about Native Americans to other people, because a lot of people, they don't even know still about the schools that were out there. They don't know what really happened because they get that history that you and I were taught. They're still teaching that history today. And sometimes you get a teacher that will say, yeah, no, that's not what it was like. This is what it was like. And so it is slowly changing, but I think we all need to acknowledge it.
I don't know why it's so much harder here in America than if you go overseas to like the UK, who seems to be much, much more in grips with the reality of what the old empire did, their contribute in the slave trade. They seem to, and I'm not saying they're completely innocent, they're not. But they just seem to be far more, like you said, like it's all about like you need to be guilty. It's not so much you need to be guilty. It's about just you need to acknowledge your history.
Yeah.
And it's just acknowledgement. It's not about you having to feel guilty. That goes, back into some old, original sin BS kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to feel guilty for stuff like that. But you need to acknowledge and learn and accept your history. And there's many people. There's a guy from Japan that is currently, he has been for several years, mapping the entire surface of the Hagia Sophia in
Hagia Sophia in Turkey.
In Turkey.
Yeah.
He's from Japan. It kind of goes to show you just how interested the world is now and everything. So you don't have to feel necessarily guilty that you're white and you want to learn about Native American culture. You shouldn't feel guilty. You should feel very proud.
Yeah.
This, after all, this is part of your culture. Even something that the white culture helped wipe out, it's still a part of your culture. It is what we are. So yeah, it's absolutely important to know these things.
Yep. And I'm hoping at some point, we can dig a little deeper into each of the different tribes. And my Lakota friend as well wanted to borrow my recorder that I use sometimes when I'm doing interviews, because she wants to get some of her ancestors. I shouldn't say ancestors because your ancestors are dead, but her relatives that are alive now, they're willing to talk. And she can get to them quicker. They're willing to talk to me, but it's a matter of it's going to be a long time before I can get up there. She's up there a lot. I'm like, just take my recorder and record them. Then you have your family's history documented. Yeah. And, we can get to writing about it later. And I think that's vital to keep a hold of as well.
And going back into what we were talking about here about the Native Americans, especially out here in the Midwest, documentation was all oral history, so we just we don't have a lot of accounts. We were I shouldn't say we were very lucky. It was a fortunate situation that Lakota actually had a spoken language that we translated successfully, which there's a lot of other Native tribes we did not do that.
Right.
We just ended up wiping them out before we ever understood them.
Yeah.
Such as Aztecs and some of the other southern tribes. So yeah.
So back on our story here, there have been at least 15 tribes that were documented as being in what is now Nebraska, so the entire state. They sometimes lived here, but they entered and abandoned the area depending on the climate and other factors such as drought, overabundance of moisture, those kind of things. And with all that movement, you're going to get a diversity in language and culture of these different tribes. And just touching on the eastern end of the state for a moment, I don't want to stay too long on the eastern end because this is about the western end. But the Pawnee and the Omaha learned how to adapt their ways of hunting when the Spanish introduced them to horses in the 17th and 18th centuries. That was huge for them. All the tribes also traded with the explorers and the fur traders who came through the state. And this place wasn't as entirely empty like a lot of people think. And that's one of the things that we do get taught as kids, is there was nothing here. And the place was crap and nobody wanted to stay here, so nobody came here. Just wasn't true. So there was a lot happening long before the white man settled in this state, and in particular western Nebraska. You want to learn about the tribes on the eastern part of the state, there's lots of books you can go read. We're not doing the east. But
I do think it's interesting to note about what you were saying about the horses, because before this time they did not have horses. Because another thing that you get as a kid is you get all these great battles with all these tribes on horseback, and that just wasn't the way it was.
Yep.
That's just it wasn't how that happened. Not up here. Not then. Farther south, because they introduced horses up here in the 17th and 18th century. So how far back was it further south? I mean, there's probably were tribes that knew horses much better by then.
Yeah, I'm not a South American or Central American historian, but I think it was 15th and 16th centuries. Because the Spanish came after Columbus, and we all know Columbus was 1492, so that's late 15th century. So, they're behind, so to speak, up here at least a century.
And if I remember correctly, there are prehistoric horses in North America, but they were very, very small.
Yes.
They weren't something that you could ever ride.
No. Maybe as a 5-year-old.
Maybe, yeah. They're probably the size of a pony.
So, according to the Nebraska legislature, the various tribes living in the Nebraska area may have numbered around 40,000 people in 1800. So you think about that in 1800, you got 50 years later, you got all the people coming through on the trails. You've already got at least 40,000 people living here. And we're taught there ain't anybody. So
not only that, or there are 40,000 people who are never really in the same place.
True.
Because they were all nomadic from what I understood up here. There wasn't a lot of farming.
Yeah, and and when they stayed, it was, for a few weeks or so while they were hunting.
Yep.
It wasn't permanent settlements. So out here in western Nebraska, the members of the Great Sioux Nation didn't have any long-term settlements.
Didn't have a capital, as far as I know, didn't have a city.
Nope. You just kind of knew, Connor's over there right now and Irene's over here, and then 2 weeks from now we're not going to be anywhere near there. We're going to be someplace else, and we might stay there for a few weeks and then move on, but everybody still kind of knew the general location. So if I wanted to find you, I would know roughly where you were at. And it wasn't too hard to go and find you, but we didn't, there wasn't anything long term. The northern and western parts of the state were used all the time for hunting and skirmishes with other tribes, which is why people think this area was empty, because that's the majority of what they did here was they followed game, they hunted, and they had skirmishes with other tribes. They didn't stay in the area. When we get to talk about Crazy Horse in another episode just for him, oh my gosh, when I get to doing that's going to be like a 900-part episode. So it's been reported that his vision quest took place near Scottsbluff National Monument. Now, we'll never fully truly know, but from the stories that were passed down, the descriptions seem to really fit the monument. And it's why before COVID, the Lakota actually had several years where they had their yearly powwow at Legacy of the Plains, which is right there in the shadow of the monument. And that's why they wanted to do that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
are they going to do it? I mean, now that COVID's over? Or?
I don't know. I
hope they do.
I would love to go to another one, but I don't know what the plans are right now. COVID kind of killed a lot of little niche things like that in the area. So the Sioux were here all the time. They just didn't live here. The tribes that were living here the tribes were living in the area in general and interacting with each other for hundreds of thousands of years. before we even recognize them as, specific Native American tribes, if you go back and you learn evolution and how everybody came over the land bridge and all that stuff, humans were here for hundreds of thousands of years. And then they eventually form into the different tribes, and then the government comes in and starts trying to acquire land. Because that's what governments do. It doesn't matter where you go. You look at Germany, World War II, what did they say they want? They wanted Lebensraum. They wanted room to spread their people out. And then it just kept, we got this bit, now we want this bit, now we want this bit. And we end up with a world war because of it. And governments have done that. Go back to Greece, Rome. That's what they do. I'm not saying it's good or bad. We could sit and have that conversation all day long. So in this area, 18 treaties just covering land in Nebraska were negotiated between 1825 and 1892. 8 reservations were established in the 19th century concerning the tribes who were in the Nebraska Territory, and 6 of those are within the state today. In 2015, 2.2% of the state's population were considered American Indian and Alaska Native people. So that's a dramatic drop over the course of about 200 years. You went from being the only people here. So your American Indians were the only people here. Now they're only 2.2. So they literally went from 100% to 2.2%. Anyway, so you're going to see me return often to the Lakota, the Sioux in general, and the Northern Cheyenne. I need to do more research on the Arapaho, the Kiowa, and the Comanche, because I just don't know much about them. I kind of went down the Lakota, the Sioux, the Northern Cheyenne rabbit holes, and that's what I know most about, and it's because I do have Lakota contacts out here. And it's very easy to just keep learning and learning and learning and learning, and then you forget that some of these other tribes were in the area as well. And when your friends are Lakota, you tend to learn more Lakota history. And the Lakota and Cheyenne also seem to me as the 2 tribes that had a bigger impact on this area than the Arapaho. Yes, the Arapaho were here, but you didn't have the Great Arapaho Nation. You ended up with the Great Sioux Nation. Well, you can argue as well all day long, that's something the government created, but they were also in that area. It's complicated, nuanced, but those are the 2 that come up the most often when you talk about tribes in western Nebraska and eastern Wyoming.
Yeah, it's the North Cheyenne and the Sioux Nation.
Yeah. And so I basically need to buy more books, and I already have a pile.
I believe the Lakota Sioux is the biggest Native tribe in America, even bigger than the Navajo down south.
I think so. I know they're
by population.
Yeah, I know they're the biggest of the Sioux. But you're right, they might be the biggest out of all the tribes. That fact I actually don't know.
I thought they were. I don't know if they're the biggest. They're certainly one of the poorest in the U.S.
Yes.
But I didn't know. I thought someone told me that the Sioux Nation as a whole, the entire Sioux Nation is the largest nation in America.
I believe so.
Wrong.
I think you're right.
Because I know the Navajo is also huge.
I think you're right. So. And if we're wrong, someone will, tell us.
Correct us, people. Yeah. That's what we're here for.
Because, as much as you try to research for all this, you can't think of all the things that are going to come up when we start talking about it. Yeah. So, I'm skipping over a bit here because I already said it, but I just said the rest of that paragraph in a different way because we got off topic, but I actually talked about it. So I'm going to try and get off my soapbox on Native Americans. Connor knows all too well how long I could go on about this, but it is important to remember that Native Americans were living in this area long before the first white man came through here. Pretty much any tribe that used western Nebraska as a traveling point were following the animals for food. Much of their livelihood was also along the rivers, and we learned this in school. People go where water is and where the food is. Mm-hmm. And animals go where the water is. So it's true today. You look at most of your major cities around the world, the big, huge ones started around water. Yep. So while most tribes didn't settle in western Nebraska, they certainly knew which animals traveled through here and tracked them during their hunts. And the first human trails through here were the game trails, and they were following dinner. Mm-hmm. So when the Native Americans came through the area, they did so with a particular purpose. They hunted and they had camps. And I forgot who told me this story about out near Mont's Ranch. But there's some berries out there that are non-native to this area. And they're a well-known source of berries up in South Dakota that the Lakota ate. And so, no one really knows for sure, but they're in a particular area that's a natural covering. So if you were a Lakota 150, 200 years ago, and you're coming down here to hunt the bison in this particular area out by Mont's Ranch, it makes sense to plant the berries there because you're going to be there a few days, few weeks, mm-hmm. and you've got a good source of food there. I mean,
Or maybe to entice the buffalo. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if the buffalo ate those berries or not, but it makes sense why this non-native plant is there when the Lakota ate those berries.
And that's another thing that's fun to mention. Do you know how the Lakota hunted bison before the horses? Because they used to.
Yeah, it was the pits, right?
Yeah, they used to chase huge herds off of pits or off of ridges. I guess I wouldn't call them a cliff because that makes you think that Nebraska has lots of high cliffs. We don't really, but we have these banks that kind of jut off, and they can go off in like 10, 15 feet. Mm-hmm. And they would drive these off and break their legs basically.
Yeah, there's some down in Cedar Canyon. I would say no more than 20 feet deep. Mm-hmm. I'm not just gonna la 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 because I'm gonna break my legs and then somebody can kill me. And I mean, it really sucks. It's kind of gruesome, but you don't have horses. You need to eat. Yep. How do you make this work?
Well, and again, it gives you that. You usually get those impressions when you're growing up. You get all this huge buffalo herd and these natives on horseback kind of like shooting arrows at them.
Yeah, that they're all expert, marksmen.
As far as I know, they never really were. Another misconception is I don't know if they ever were quite excellent marksmen on horsebacks the way that you would think the Mongolians are. Like if you want to know like excellent marksmen were the Mongolian tribes.
Yeah, like all of them in the Mongolian tribes were marksmen, but you just had like one or two, or it wasn't anything to the degree of the Mongolians, and it's also easier just to channel them all into this pit than to, oh God, I missed. Now I got to go get my arrow and go back, Well,
another thing is that these tribes, they didn't just hunt like one buffalo. Like
it was the whole herd.
Like you do with one bow, one arrow, one buffalo. That'd be a waste of time. They would kill hundreds of buffalo in one kill because you had hundreds of people to feed. These were large tribes. When there's 40,000, I don't know how many individuals were ever on the move, but it was probably at least a couple hundred.
Yeah.
So you need lots of meat.
Yeah. So, that little story was just a neat little side trip.
Side trip.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's totally cool because you had some info that I didn't have. I believe that those berries are in southeastern Montana as well, but I was told this story in 2014, so I'm trying to remember 9.5 years ago, the whole story, and that's the bit that's still in my brain. It could just be an old man trying to figure out why those berries are there, but it makes absolute sense to me why they are only in this one weird location in rural Scottsbluff County.
Yeah, interesting.
It's not like they just blew down here in a rainstorm or something. So the Native Americans would also come into the area for trade when the fur trappers started coming through here and when the forts were established. So not only were game trails an easy way to track your food, it was a great way to keep safe. When I was out at Fort Robinson hiking all around, when I was out at Fort Robinson hiking all around the Wilderness Creek area, I got a bit off trail and a little lost, and this is because I'm always looking around at my surroundings, taking pictures, thinking, ooh, what's that over there? And then I go take a picture and, oh crap, where's the trail? I do that a lot, which is also probably why people don't want to go hiking with me. I found a cattle trail on this particular trip, and I didn't know where it was leading, but I know that cattle follow well-worn paths and generally stick to safety. Mm-hmm. So I'm already lost. I got off the trail somehow. Here's a cattle trail. I'm just going to follow this. So the trail I was on took me back to the starting point of where I started hiking. It wasn't completely back to the starting point, but it brought me back to this fence, which I understand why. You reach the fences when you're out hiking out here in rural Nebraska, and it's like, please close the fence behind you so the cattle don't get out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I am a weak little girl. They are very, very hard to do. I can't tell you how many times I've gone under them on my stomach, tried to climb over them, because I can't pull. They're so tight. Mm-hmm. I can't pull them loose. And then if I do get them loose, I'm there for 15 minutes trying to put it back because I'm like, I can't leave it. I have to lock the damn gate back up. So I hate that, and I wish there was a better way to do it, but I also understand you can't have a loose gate because those cows are just going to push through it.
Yep.
So that's where I ended up back, was at that gate. And I didn't try to do it the second time. I did crawl underneath. And so my whole front was covered in dirt. I don't care. If I cared about getting dirty, I wouldn't be out hiking. So I was a little bit disappointed because I wanted to go up a different way and make it a really big loop so I didn't have to come back the way that I went out. And, I had already done 5 miles, so I wasn't going to go back and try and do it again. And if I get lost, well, now I've done 10 miles and So I just reconnected to the trail and went back up the way that I came to my car. And I think the next time I have time to go hiking out there, I'm going to start at the place where I wanted to end. And that way, if I get lost, at least I get lost on a different part of the trail, but I think it might help me get my bearings a little bit. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is follow game trails. You're usually going to be safe with the game trail. And that day that I was out there, it was also getting late in the day, and I don't want to be out in the wilderness at nighttime when it's dinner time for big critters. I don't think they would bother me, but it's about safety. So I had a fun time hiking out there. I got to listen to the birds. I saw this cool little frog just hunkered down in some mud by the side of a creek. It was just an awesome day. So, yeah, okay, I got lost, but I had fun, so it doesn't matter. So follow the game trails. They'll keep you safe, and you won't be too far from water most of the time. Out here, that water is the North Platte River, and it's vital to every living thing here. When the fur traders and the trappers arrived, they followed the same trails. Everybody followed the river. Mm-hmm. Connor, I know you want to do an episode just on the water and its importance here, so I won't go too deep into it, but without water, there's no life.
There's no reason to settle here.
Yeah. I wish I knew this gentleman, Kelly Looking Horse, a little bit better. I've done a couple of stories with him, and he went over to the North Platte NRD, which is the Natural Resources District, and does Nebraska have 8 of them? I forget. The state's divided up into different NRDs, and North Platte NRD is ours. But he did this 1.5-hour talk about how vital water is to life, and it was just absolutely fascinating. And then he had some Lakota friends come in, and they cooked everybody lunch. Oh my God, it was so good. Another perk of being a reporter, you get to do those kind of things. But you don't have water, you don't have life. So when the fur trappers and the traders arrived, they followed these same trails. Everybody went through. Anyway, I'm repeating myself. Okay. Every time I look at you, Connor, I lose my place in my notes.
Don't do that.
That's right. People can listen and be like, "Oh my God, there's that crazy woman again." So while the North Platte River waters these crops, please don't drink the water. You're going to get sick.
Very sick.
Unfortunately, travelers through the area during the Oregon Trail days, they learned this the hard way. The cholera epidemic of 1851 to 1852 was absolutely devastating, with extremely high mortality rates. I mean, if you got cholera, you're done. Mm-hmm. You're dead not long after. And so while we learn in school and concentrate on going west, there were also people who went east. So that's all we get taught in school. Okay, I'm going to say at least what I was taught in school. You went out west. You were going to Oregon. You were going to find a new life, or you were a Mormon. You were going to Utah. Nobody ever talked about going east. And if you think about it, you got a guide on the trail. He ain't staying in Utah or Oregon. He's got to come back to get his next group of people. The fur trappers, they came back because here's all my furs. Give me some money so I can go buy some food, so I can go get more fur.
Well, I also think before, a lot of people don't know. Well, you should know if you know your history. Before the Louisiana Purchase, before they got all the land, the middle part of America was mostly belonged to Spain, and they actually sent explorers. They up this far, just north of here of Harrison. There's rumors of them finding Spanish coins or Spanish expeditionary marks. So we know that people were up here and exploring, and so by the time Lewis and Clark got through, and then the Oregon Trail got brought through, you really never. It was really curious what was already here.
Yeah.
What was already around. Yeah. You don't really know.
And not to knock on Lewis and Clark, because they are important in history, but there were tons of people here already. They just marked where everything was and was like, let's figure out how to get there.
Yeah. They were trying to find the route to the Pacific. So.
Yeah. And I don't think we'll ever cover Lewis and Clark, because I will never do anything justice for what's out there.
I had to do a full report in the 4th grade on Lewis and Clark. Yep. Yeah. I don't know how much I remember, but they were very, very fascinating people.
I did a report on Edison in 6th grade. Thought he was a cool dude because he wasn't a school kid. He hated school, and then he did all these cool things. And then, man, I became an adult and learned what Edison was really like, and I'm going, wow.
Kind of a jerk.
Yes, thank you. That's a very kind way of phrasing what he was. So the people who went east were the ones that really provided us lots of information about the area. The first people to record seeing what would become Scottsbluff National Monument were the fur traders, and they did so on a trip while working for John Jacob Astor, who had a huge monopoly in the fur trading. He pretty much had cornered the market for a while on that. They were heading east back toward St. Louis, Missouri, and wrote in their journals about seeing the bluff on December 25th, 1812. So I think that just happened because, hey, it's Christmas, this is where we're at, and some dude's just sitting there writing in his journal and is like, hey, might as well write about this monument because everybody looks for it when they're going both ways.
Nothing else to do.
Yeah.
There's only the monument to look at, so I guess I might as well write about it.
Yeah, and there wasn't a road to the top, so...
Yeah, I ain't going up there.
And so speaking of the bluff now, we need to talk about someone who ended up being instrumental in a lot of place names in the area. The mountain man, fur trapper, and fur trader Hiram Scott. You see his name all over the place out here. Hiram Scott was out here trapping and trading and basically being a dude of his time, making some money. And on one trip in 1828, Hiram gets sick on his way back east to St. Louis. So at this point, there's several stories about Hiram, and I'll touch on a couple of them. You can go do all the research you want on him. We don't really know what the true story is. There's true elements in each one of them, and you can just kind of pick your favorite, which one you like. So at this point, the Warren A. Ferris, who was an employee of the American Fur Company, wrote a story down in 1830, and this was the company, I believe, Hiram Scott was working for, so you kind of lean toward that might be the true story. But, I'm sure there's stories people tell of me working at the Star-Herald by people who didn't like me, know.
Yeah, I'm sure I just have a fabulous reputation.
Yeah, so, it just kind of depends, whatever. So two of Hiram's companions stick him in a boat, and they begin traveling downstream. No one has ever verified why, but at some point in time, they chuck him out of the boat and leave him on the north bank of the Platte River. We can speculate. Maybe he died in a boat. Maybe he was a pain in the butt, and they said, yeah, get out. We're done dealing with you. We're sick of going down the river with you. Maybe they wanted to walk instead of dragging his butt in a boat. Maybe
the people in the boat were just thieves.
Yeah.
That's their whole gimmick.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? But like lots of other people that have died in history, he's dead and his companions kept on traveling. In the spring, some other folks found his body on the south side of the river. Again, lots of speculation. I know somewhere between Lincoln and Omaha, on the other side of the state, I've actually walked across the river on Halloween. This is a story y'all don't need to know about, but maybe Hiram swam across. The river isn't that deep. I am 5'4", and it would come up just to like the bottom of my rib cage. So what's that, Connor? Like what, 4.5 feet?
4.5 feet.
About 4.5 feet deep. I've never seen it go down that low, but there's a place between Lincoln and Omaha I have been where I literally walked out and just the bottoms of my shoes got wet.
Yes, but back in this was before the damming.
Yeah, so
North Platte was. There's some old pictures. Used to be in the Gehring Bakery that you could see the old North Platte and how big it actually was.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't something easily to swim across, and it was something where a lot of undercurrents could sweep you down. After the damming of all the rivers, they, of course, like now, you can wade across it in certain areas.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily suggest it.
I wouldn't, because it's still there and swiftly water. Yeah. So again, we just don't know if that story is the real story. Did he swim across? Did he walk across? Because the story says he was left on one side and found on the other side. I can tell you that if you're in the Scottsbluff area, please do not go in the river unsupervised.
No.
Authorities will be lucky if they ever find you. And if they do, you will be dozens of miles away downstream.
Yeah. Well, that being said, there are safe zones. The YMCA camp opened up a safe zone, actually, across the river. It's basically they created an inlet where the river flows into so you don't get swept out by the current. So as long as you're in that little inlet, you're safe.
And I still would only go if other people were there so that
they
could immediately say, hey, Irene's floating down the river.
Personally, I'm worried about the snapping turtles. We have really big snapping turtles around here, so I'd be a little wary of the water.
Yeah. Another story tells of how Hiram traveled another 100 miles before he died, and then a third story says he was left behind at Laramie Fork, which is 60 miles from the bluff, but he somehow made it to the bluff before he died. So he's sick, they leave him behind, he manages to make it another 60 miles, and then croaks. No one wrote anything down, so who really knows what the truth is? And I haven't built a time machine yet to go back and find out.
So basically, the bluff was named after the first white guy they found just to die here. Yeah. Kind of like the Donner Pass.
Exactly.
It's like you get, if some tragic happens, we'll name the area after you.
Yeah. So regardless of what story is true, that big bluff was named after him. It was called Scott's Bluff, 2 words, without an apostrophe, but sometimes with an apostrophe. I hate when I do research because we know today Scott's Bluff, without an apostrophe, is the county. Scott's Bluff is the city, 1 word. Back then, man, it was all interchangeable, and you really need to figure out from context. Are they talking about a city, a county, where exactly are they talking about?
Well, when I was a kid, I didn't understand what a bluff was. So I always thought it meant Scott's lie. Like, he's lying about something. So I thought that's why they separated. It's like, oh, yeah, he's bluffing. Like, there was never a Scott here. Yeah. His name was Larry. I know that. Something like that, but I didn't understand.
See,
the bluff was the actual hill
and
structure.
I'm going to say, because I know you learned Nebraska history in 4th grade in this state, I'm going to say your 4th grade teacher sucked because they should have told you what a bluff was.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure she did tell me.
Oh, you just weren't listening?
My 4th grade teacher was pretty adequate. I would say I was not an adequate student.
Okay.
I won't put this one on the teachers.
Oh, okay. No. Dang it. Okay. So then the government comes and takes over the land. It became the Scotts Bluff National Monument, and the 100th anniversary was in 2019. The city, Scotts Bluff, which is 1 word, and the county is 2 words, are all derived from Hiram Scott's last name. We also had Hiram Scott College out here for a few years in the late 1960s. The college is gone, but a lot of the buildings remain, including what is now the Western Nebraska Veterans Home and the building that the State Patrol and 4-H and the UNL Extension Center, they all share the same building. Eventually, so we don't really know how he died, why he was left here, whatever. You can believe whatever story you want, but if you hear Scott anything around here, it probably has something to do with being named after him.
Yeah, I still think Hiram would have been a better name than Scott.
Yeah, Hiram's Bluff.
Yeah, Hiram's Bluff. That would have been better.
I mean, that sounds so much more awesome than Scott's Bluff.
Scott's just so plain.
Yeah. Like, Sorry to all the Scots out there, but yeah. Hiram would just be like, yeah.
Or you just go Star Trek and go Scotty's Bluff.
There you go.
That'd been cool.
But then they'd have to have burgers and fries on top.
True.
Sorry, inside joke.
Inside joke.
So eventually fur trading went on the wane. People wanted other fancy things. They didn't like fur anymore. So the fur trappers and traders became guides for the wagon trains along the trail. The available maps at the time were garbage. You really couldn't replicate at the time having a person who had been here many times and knew exactly the way. It's like when I'm sure people use their cell phones when they travel now. I still prefer paper maps. And every now and then I'll get lost. You go in and you ask somebody for directions that lives there because they know the area better because they're there. They travel that area all the time. So even at this time when some maps were starting to be made, I still want a human because...
And it's really kind of sad. I think it also just had a lot to do with the lack of cartographers that were probably willing to go out to that area because we had our colonies well mapped. We knew exactly how long it took to get to Virginia or how long it took to get to North Carolina, and we had all the routes out and even out to the sea. So I think it had a lot to do with people that went out west weren't necessarily the intellectuals. They weren't the first to head out. A lot of them were the poor, the people that just wanted the new life situation. But they weren't necessarily, I'm not saying like no educational people went out west. That's not what I'm saying, of course. But I'm saying in the majority fashion, I don't think there was a lot of the abundance of education that went from east to west versus from Europe to New York. Where you had so many intellectuals coming into New York and so much coming out of it. But it seemed to go about to Chicago and so and a lot of it, for a long time, that's what they always said, the West always had to catch up. So
we're still living 20 years behind. That's tough for another day.
I don't know whose fault that is nowadays.
Not mine.
That's a different conversation.
So your guides here just knew what the trail was like, what to expect, how to get around, what happened when disaster happened.
We had whole valleys here that would flood out too. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
The land would change.
Yeah. And that's something I noted down here was trees. Was, you went out here last year with a group of people. Now you're coming back 2 years later and the trees cut down or got struck by lightning. Only you are going to notice that because you're the guide that goes through here all the time. And if you just have a little crappy map that says, hey, this tree or this bush is here, well, if it burned down, by the time the person who bought that guide goes out, they're like, where the hell's this tree? And then they get lost and bad things happen. So we will get into John C. Fremont later on because he did attempt to make guidebooks for people who could afford the book, but not a real person. So not that we're buying people, you're hiring a guide, not buying a person. Sometimes I write things down and then I don't look at them for a few weeks and I'm like, oh my God.
We were kind of sort of buying people back then, so you're not completely incorrect.
Yeah. So Fremont's guides were way better than some of the garbage that was out there, but he came to western Nebraska for the first time in 1842, created maps for roads, plants, and animals. And the key thing is he also got along with the tribes in the area. So that's a really good thing when you're trying to direct people through a book of the best course of action to get through a piece of land or a large area. And the Native Americans are going to know way more still than even old fur trappers that turn to guides. They're just going to know the area way better. And they're going to know just by pointing, eat that plant, don't eat that one. And I mean, his books did replace guides eventually by the 1850s, but they really are a lot like our maps today. So, when you look at a map today, how far is it from Scottsbluff to Gearing? Is it like 7 miles?
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. But you'll look at a map and it'll tell you. And his maps gave, it's this many miles from this creek to that creek. It's this many miles from this fort to this water source. And people really started relying on that. And some of his guidebooks even listed where some of the tribe's settlements were and where some of the trading posts were. So it just, I don't know, it to me, when I travel somewhere, so let's say I'm traveling for the first time ever from Scottsbluff to Lincoln, I will note down, and I still do this because I'm a huge dork, I will put it down on a little Post-it note and stick it on my leg while I'm driving, and then I'm like, okay, the next place I'm going to pass is Ogallala. The next place I'm going to pass is Kearney. The next place I'm going to pass is Grand Island. And so that helps me know that I am going in the right direction. And so that's kind of what his guides did, was it let people continually check for accuracy and that they were going in the right direction. And, once you had that kind of accurate map, you didn't need a person guide anymore. You could take another person, or you could take another skilled person, because if you're your housewife and, let's say, a doctor, a couple of kids, a chaplain, like your general run-of-the-mill people. Well, now, instead of having that guide, you can have somebody hired specifically that knows how to repair wagons. Someone specifically that can cook you a better meal than hardtack or, crappy beans every damn day. Or, we couldn't take Grandma on the trip. Now you can. I wouldn't leave my grandma behind, but some people would. So it just kind of opened up a bunch of more options for another person to go on that wagon or wagon train. So the wagons in these wagon trains also use the same trails the trappers, the Native Americans, and the animals used. They started coming through in 1830, but the first true wagon train didn't come through until 1841. So before that, there was like single wagons, maybe a couple of people hooked up together, but like wagon train, 1841. It was known as the Bidwell-Bartleson Party, and this wagon train had 100 wagons to its name. Y'all can go look up the Bidwell-Bartleson Party. There's so much about the Oregon Trail we can do, and we can do an episode just on them. Yeah, but they are the first recognized train. I have also seen some accounts where they say there were only 80 wagons, but it's
who's counting? Once you get past, 50, 55, you just kind of stop.
It's just like there's a long trail of them. And that's the other thing, too, that I learned after I moved out here. We're taught that they all travel in a row. Because what's the famous paintings of going through Mitchell Pass? You have to go in a train. Most of them were spread out wide. So
because you constantly had problems.
Yeah.
And not everybody was like locked toe step like a military.
Yeah. So when they got to western Nebraska, the grass was plentiful and the animals grazed to their heart's content. And this is the first folks that are coming through here, including the Bidwell-Bartleson folks. And, of course, as time goes on, there are more animals to feed than grass, and the grass can't grow back quick enough. So you're going to get into new troubles of how do you feed your animals, as well as having to bring all their feed with you on the journey. Even though at the time there was lots of grass for grazing, the people who traveled through western Nebraska didn't like it. They said there wasn't anything worthwhile here. It was basically space to get through on your journey to the wonderful, lush and green Oregon, because Oregon is all super cool and Nebraska sucks. Whatever.
I'll see you in Portland.
Yeah. I also want to point out that these descriptions were for males reporting. This is one of the cool things you figure out when you're reading stuff. When they talk to... Yeah.
Yeah, it's the women they just seem to fall in love. They start to talk about the flowers and the grass and the wind and
Yep. So when the males talked to the reporters back east, they trashed Nebraska. They called it the Great American Desert. They didn't see any value in the land at all and scoffed at the idea of ever stopping here. It was basically, it's hot, it's humid, there's bugs, there's snakes. There's no reason to stop. It sucks in every aspect in life. And people believed them for a while. But you look at the women's diaries, and like you just said, Connor, they saw beauty everywhere they looked. They didn't just record, here's this flower, here's that landmark. We passed Chimney Rock today. While that's all in their diaries, they wrote about the things they saw. They wrote about what they looked at, how beautiful something was, why it might be a good place to stop near there. They described what they saw in a way that would make your 12th grade English teacher proud. I remember, and I mentioned my 12th grade English teacher because, oh man, she was a stickler for that kind of stuff.
And was this kind of more because, males in general back then were expected to have this kind of rugged, tough attitude and weren't really necessarily even required to be educated to the point of writing?
Yeah,
I mean, they didn't have to be journalists.
Even the ones that were educated, I think the general consensus was, they know how to go from point A to point B. We need to do this many miles today. So they've got their daily mission to get them to the final place. And the women are just like, and not all women. We are very overgeneralizing here.
We are, but I do think we should mention it because not only women, again, generalizing, have more time on the trail. They weren't necessarily out and about. They were in the wagons. They were doing that kind of stuff. But also, they were in charge of educating their children when teachers weren't around.
Yeah.
So reading and writing was very, very important in America's society since the beginning. That's what arguably help us win the Revolutionary War. Our ability to read.
I'm curious to hear more about that another time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know the whole thing about that, but because we'll get that's a rabbit hole. That's a rabbit hole. No, I don't want to go into that.
We're like, we've already been down 15 rabbit holes today.
My point is there was not a plethora of teachers on the Oregon Trail. If you did not have a teacher or a pastor, who were your other teachers that taught you how to read and write, it lended up to the women, to your mom.
And I mean, if you think about it, you got a guy on the trail, and he's like, "Yep, there's Chimney Rock. We need to get to that today."
Yeah, they were just kind of dead set on a mission.
Yeah, and the woman's going to be like, "Yeah, there's Chimney Rock. We stayed on this side of the river for this reason. We found some berries to eat here." They're going to be, their diaries just tend to be the more observant part. And
observant.
The two bits work well together because I can tell you many times I have hiked up on top of Cedar Canyon, and I know my friend Steve has had a different experience from me every single time I've gone with him because I don't know how to get back out once we get so far into there. It would take me a hard time to get back out. He knows the way in, all the way to the other side of the top of the bluff and all the way back, and there's no real well-paved trail. It's very easy to get off trail and get lost. Mm-hmm. And I don't pay attention because I'm with Steve. He knows how to do it. So I'm looking at all the little things like, last time we were up here, this tree was not falling over. It got struck by lightning since the last time we were up here. So I'm looking at completely different things because he's guiding and leading me. And now I have people like you who want me to take you up there. And I'm going, well, crap, we're going to get lost. I mean, granted, it's the top of the bluff. You can't get too lost. But I don't really know my way around up there because I don't pay attention because I'm with Steve.
It's more like we go up and we get stuck and we can't come back down.
Oh, that won't happen. You just eventually, it just might take longer because there's a couple ways you can get sidetracked. And
we're not ones to ever get
sidetracked. God, no. We always stick right on topic all the time. So I totally get that, why the women's diaries are different, because I still do the same thing. Whenever Steve's like, hey, you want to go to this place? Yeah. I want to take you up on top of Bede Mountain. Same exact thing. I can get you part way up there, and then I'm not sure how we got the rest of the way to the top, because Steve just went and did the trail, and I just followed him. And then I was like, oh, cool.
And you were just being observant.
Yes.
We're not necessarily paying attention.
Yeah. So you and I are still going to go up there. We just might take a different route. I don't know. Whatever. As long as we don't fall off.
I tend to be just as observant, so we definitely might get lost.
Yeah, we're kind of screwed then. So it also goes to, like I just mentioned, going out to Courthouse and Jail Rocks, when I went out there with Paul, I got sidetracked by a stupid skull of a cattle, some kind of cow, taking pictures from every single angle. All of a sudden I look up, Paul's nowhere to be found. I yell his name because neither one of us had, I think he didn't have a cell phone yet. I think I had just gotten one. And we never needed one because we were always together, so what do we need a cell phone for? We had a landline. And so I literally yelled his name, and he yelled back, and I'm trying to figure out where the echo's coming from, and then see this little tiny person way up at the top. How long was I taking pictures of that cow skull? Because you're way up there. And it had been a good 25 minutes I was there and totally distracted. And I want to go back to there to climb up there because I've never climbed up there because our day was done by the time Paul found his way back down and we got back together. So, anyway, I can give you many examples. So also the other cool thing about Bede Mountain is just being able to look down, and the landscape is pretty much the same. Most of it is the same. And you can sit there and think about, if you were a Native American sitting on top of Bede Mountain watching people going across the trail and what you thought. Anyway, it's gorgeous. But I live here. I'm constantly writing in my journal or on my blog about the awesome things that are here so other people can come and see for themselves. And I'll shut up about it when I'm dead, and that's probably, I think that might be the last time I go on a rabbit trail. You never know. Maybe I'll make a video for when I'm dead, and people can watch it, and it will go off tangent somewhere just so that people will have one more rabbit hole to go down after I'm dead and can blame me for. So for the folks back then, what these women wrote could also be vital for your survival, like I was just explaining a couple minutes before. And I'm going to read from an article I wrote several years ago explaining why. In one diary, the group was worried about getting to their destination on time. Their wagon train stopped to take a vote on whether they should rest on the Sabbath or keep going. The majority wanted to continue. 2 families joined another train that did stop on the Sabbath. The train that stopped arrived at the destination 2 weeks earlier and had all their animals.
Huh. So the ones that stopped, and the Sabbath being every Sunday, every Sunday they stopped. And they didn't do anything the entire Sunday because I think that's what you're supposed to do, right? And so, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's the important lesson that Irene never learned in the Oregon Trail game. Don't you want to stop? You've been going for 13 days.
Gotta take a rest.
Yeah. No, we're going to keep going. We're all just going to die once we get into Wyoming.
But as we described before when we were talking about Wee Granny, just how much of a real fear that was to get to where you need to go before the winter hits because you just didn't know. And once winter hit, if you're out here, you are very, very much screwed.
Yeah. Because the tunnel at the Scottsbluff Monument was not built for another 50, 60 years, so you couldn't hide out in the tunnel for the winter.
The 2 forts that were around were well garrisoned and supplied for their men, but they were not a safe haven shelter for the Oregon Trail people that got caught in the wintertime, and they never really advertised that they were.
Nope.
So, I mean...
Yeah. Don't come out here in the winter if there's nothing out here. So that gets us to a conversation you and I had about what to do on the Sabbath. You're supposed to rest if you're following your religious text, but your animals need to rest too. I like the end of that quote because it reminds me more of that Oregon Trail thing. And I've died a couple of times now in the new game I downloaded for my Nintendo Switch. And my animals die, my people die. They don't get dysentery. They die of starvation and exhaustion. So
just a whip cracker.
I know, I'm terrible. And then I die too. So like I have to admit,
keep going.
It was easier to when you go on the little side quest to kill rabbits and deer and stuff. Mm-hmm. The old version was very easy for me. This new version, I suck at killing animals. Oh my God. And it shouldn't be too hard because the computer technology has advanced enough that you can be more precise, but that actually makes it worse for me for whatever reason. I don't, and it could just be because I grew up, with 8-bit games and
the 8-bit game lag time between pushing the button and the actual thing.
Yeah. So, what the women wrote in their diaries were important. And, some people might think, writing a description of that dumb flower again, Irene's just stuck on this stupid flower. Well, that flower might be edible. And if it's edible to humans and animals, and I keep writing about it in my journal, for X number of days, we're going to have that flower that we can eat. Mm-hmm. And that could literally come up between, are you going to live or die? Everything is important here. Everything's a marker. Everything's an identification point. You have to look at all those things. So it's important to have those so-called male and female perspectives because you need all that working together for you to be okay.
I don't mean to go down on another rabbit hole. Okay. You mentioned land markers, so I just got to say, you people got to stop stacking your rocks here. Stop. And there's a good reason why. Old pioneers did that to make original land markers. So if you're going out and you're having some of these, it was especially popular, used by the National Forest Service back in like the 50s and 60s. But even before that, it was used by native tribes to mark things. And they would do this balancing stone thing that people are just in love with on Instagram. And that would be used to mark things. So now they're having problems because too many people are doing them. And they're big. So their original kind of meaning's gotten lost. And, the National Park Service, of course, is not happy at all that their markers got taken away. Especially if you go to arches. That was one of those things they very specifically ask you, do not stack the stones because you're out in the desert. I mean, if you think this is the Great American Desert, go out to Arches, Utah. That's a desert. You can really die out there. So the stone stacking really was useful for a long time out there until recently. So just a little, as I go down a little hole here. Not that there's a whole lot of rocks out here to stack, but just cut it out, people. Stop stacking those rocks.
And to bring up Cedar Canyon again, and I have pictures of the little rock stack. There is, as far as I know, it is the only way to get to the top of the bluff down there at Cedar Canyon. And when you're on top trying to find where that trail starts, it's not evident. You have to go down about 25 feet or so before you see the trail. And you can't really see it from the top. So there is that stack of rocks that says this is where you're supposed to start going down. And in roughly 25 feet or so, there's the trail. Because the trail really starts under like a little canopy of trees. So that kind of camouflages where the beginning of the trail is. Now, if you're a bighorn sheep or white-tailed deer, you know where that trail is.
Yeah, it's used as trail markers a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, so stop stacking rocks.
Yeah, stop stacking rocks, people.
Also, you probably wouldn't mess with the women on the treks across this country. And, I'm not going to go through the whole thing again where we're all whiny and stuff. My mom, your mom, they'd be fixing the wagon wheels. I'd be sitting there going, well, I guess we're going to die here,
Okay. Guess this is as good a place as any.
Yeah. And, not only that, my mom could stitch up your pants. So she can fix your wheels. She can change your oil. She can do almost anything. And then, if your pants get ripped while you're trying to hunt deer, she'll stitch them up for you, too. She'd be a good person to have coming out here. Me, no. No.
I think we would be either we'd have to or natural selection wouldn't like.
Yeah, one of the two. Let us go. Yeah. So we know you need to be fit and hardy for this trip. This is partly due to the physical hardship of the trip, but also because of about a fifth of the women were either pregnant or gave birth on the trail. And I think I mentioned this in our original introductory episode, but I'm going to say it again just because I think it's really cool. No one ever mentioned the P word in their journals or diaries. Nope. Do you know the pregnancy word? So a park ranger, a friend of mine, showed me some of the text where someone would write that a woman was laid low by illness, and then bam, there's baby on the trail. You just say she's pregnant. I mean, what the heck?
Being pregnant was a dreadful illness back then. Darn.
It's a dreadful illness now. That's another topic for another day with someone who does a podcast on modern medicine. Not me, because I'm lucky I remember to take my meds, yet alone know how they all function. So also today, we need to know how important it is to heal after giving birth, Justin. Sorry. I just think about all the people that are born today and their moms need time to heal.
Yeah, I mean we even have a whole system now where you get off of work, not just for a day or two, like for an extended amount of time. Well, hopefully, if you're in a good work environment. Yes, I should correct that.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're in a proper work environment, that they should give you proper paternity leave.
Yep. And maternity leave, too.
That's right. And actually, that's completely new to me. That is
maternity and paternity leave.
I've never heard of maternity.
I have a friend from the Netherlands, and now his son was born 2005 or 6, so I know their laws have changed slightly, and I think for the better. But anyway, he had 6 months off of work. His wife had 6 months off of work.
That's incredible.
Paid.
That's incredible.
And then his wife got a year not paid, and they can't give her job away.
Wow.
So you essentially have 2 years where the parents can be there for their kids.
I personally, as the dad, maybe a week. Then I'd be like, no, you're good. No, you're good. You take the baby,
but think about that, man. If they're going to pay you for 6 months and not be at work.
That's true.
I think I'm going to chill out with the kid.
Being a dad's like not necessarily off work, though, huh?
Neither being a mom. But anyways,
exactly.
So, and we also know today there can be still complications, even with modern medicine. Well, back then, you just had a kid, 5 hours ago? You know what, dude? It's 6 a.m. Or sorry, you know what, lady? It's 6 a.m. We need to get going. And off you go.
Well, you couldn't stop. I mean, I guess, like, if you come out here to Scottsbluff and you just kind of take your car out between here and Minotera alone, just those two little towns that aren't very far away from each other, you just sit there in the middle of the road and get out of your car and just imagine there's nothing there and you're miles away from anything and you just had a baby.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do? Just stop, hang out, wait for what to happen. There's nothing that's going to happen except you're going to die. Yep. So you just got to keep going.
You're both going to die. And so now we're going to come to a misconception that I let you talk about 20 minutes ago. And that misconception is that all of these folks were poor.
I didn't say all of them.
Some of them. Yep.
I said a good majority of them.
Yeah. So there were merchants and farmers. Mm-hmm. And I let you talk about that because a lot of people do think it was only poor people that came out here.
No, and of course. Well, you had to get to the city of Oregon somehow, and that wasn't a bunch of poor people that just made that happen. Yeah. I mean, it was the merchants and the traders, and that made Oregon worth going out to. So definitely, yeah.
Yep. And so, the merchants and the farmers sold up all their crap before they left, and they're carrying their money with them. Think about that, man. That would have been, okay, Irene wouldn't have come out here on the trail. She would have had like a little tent or something somewhere. She would have robbed all these people and got some money and then set herself up someplace nice. I'm a terrible human being.
Well, and was this all, I said cash was different back then. Was this like in U.S. bonds or in like metal or jewelry? maybe a combination.
Could be a combination. Yeah, I think it would depend on the person, you know. Mm-hmm. So in the 1850s, the amount that they would be going with would be $4,000 to $5,000, and I didn't write down again the site, but there was a site that there's several sites online that, you know, convert to today's money, and that's about 25 times that. So they're going with $100,000 to $125,000.
I don't even have $4,000 right now to go to Oregon. Let alone $100,000.
Yeah. So also by the time the gold rush hit, so many people were going that supply couldn't keep up with demand. And we saw that with Wee Granny. There were not enough supplies and there were bad supplies. They also went at the wrong time of year. And what happens is if you graze your oxen, you're traveling at least half a mile off the trail now to reach the grass that used to be on the trail. Mm-hmm. Because so many people are going through.
And once you go off the trail, it's that much more dangerous for your oxen because they can get bit by a snake, they can fall into pits, they can break their ankles.
Yeah, and you and I know, even walking in an area that's supposed to be a nice park, the ground is not even. Have you been up to the parade ground at Fort Robb?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what a lot of people don't realize around here is because of the massive amount of farmings over a century or so now, a lot of the field stones are gone. But when we were out here in the plains, there were large boulders left by the Ice Age, by the movements of stones that were everywhere. And you go now and it's all smooth and flat and there's no rocks. Mm-hmm. Well, they all got pulled out by the farmers. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you'll go to areas that still have the field stones out there so you can kind of get a better idea of how it used to be back then. So yeah, there was rocks, really big rocks. Like a couple places I've been to, there's rocks that would easily break my leg, and they're just smooth, completely smooth. They look like large boulder pebbles. Yeah.
Okay.
So
It just made me think of a bunch of things. We have them too in New York, but they all got covered up by the vegetation, which isn't out here.
Yeah.
And when my aunt and uncle built their house, oh my gosh, they got behind schedule so many times that I hit another rock, and then they got to call the folks out that can pull that rock out, and then great, well now we pulled that rock out that was supposed to be the edge of the foundation of the house. But now 3/4 of the ground is gone because we just pulled that rock out. So how do we fill it and fix it so that our foundation doesn't collapse?
It doesn't collapse. Yeah.
And you come across that a lot in New York, but a lot of it is covered up. Whereas here it was all exposed.
Yep, and you'll still can go out to a lot of farms and you'll usually see a big rock pile. And a lot of people wonder, why is it there? And why does those rocks look like that? Because they're, like I said, they're smooth. And they just don't look like they should be there. And then, those are your field stones.
And they just decided we're going to put them all right there.
Pretty much. I mean, there was, of course, people would sell them to landscapers eventually and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So, in the beginning, the farmers on the trail took their oxen with them. They trained the oxen, and they knew how to take care of their animals. So, they've sold up everything they have to go, but they're keeping their oxen because they know their oxen know what to do. They also usually had their own wagons, so it was easy for them to reinforce them across the country because it's their wagon. They know how to fix it. And as time went on, people just bought what they needed. So that included food, axes, spare wheels, and that kind of stuff. But it also included unseasoned wood and untrained oxen, which, in the Wee Granny story, we learned about the unseasoned wood that we had.
Got to do a story on some sort of nickel flipper around here. I guess that's my name for them. Those crooks that flip nickels back in the old days. Those crooks that's just around the Oregon Trail flipping the nickels. Like, hey, I got an ox for you. You want an ox?
Yeah. And there are stories from 1853 and onward of people who had to go chase up their oxen each day and then yoke them up and get going. And the farmers that first came out here, they didn't have to do that. They just got up. They're like, hey, oxen, go over here. And they did. They just didn't know what to do. And you're out on the prairie, so you have to hope for the best. And you're out here in the middle of Nebraska. Nobody's going to get in their car or plane and fly out here and help you hook up your oxen. You got to figure it out on your own.
No AAA.
Yeah.
Although someone could have made a lot of money with that idea. I tell you what, if they had an Oregon Trail service that their only deal was to help other people, just a wagon full of wheels and full of spare parts and full of grease, and that's all they did is go up and down the trail. That would have been $1 million idea.
Yeah. Right. So the directions to get through Nebraska are simple. Go west. Follow the Platte River, cross into Wyoming, and go to the South Pass in Wyoming. At the pass, you take whatever route you want to your destination. Sounds easy. It is not. When Mitchell Pass was put into use in 1850, it cut off about 13 miles of trail, so you didn't need to go through Rubidoux anymore. I no longer care if I pronounce that correctly or not. Y'all can just bite me.
You actually pronounced it.
Did I say it right?
There,
well, that means I just got to pack.
You didn't say Robidoux.
Oh, I just got to pack up and move then. I know too much now. Can't be a local. And as we've mentioned before, in general, the Mormon were on the north side of the river, and the Oregon, California, and Pony Express trails were on the south side. And I reminded you about the
about them coming around.
Yeah, the re-ride. When I remembered about it. When I got up the next day.
I was going to go, but that was the afternoon that we had a pretty tumultuous thunderstorm that afternoon. Mm-hmm. So I was actually a little worried because I'm like, well, what do they do when that happens? I mean, this was like hail, thunder, and lightning storm.
I had been following it, and somewhere in Wyoming, they got to be like 2 hours behind, 2.5 hours behind, 3 hours behind. And if I remember correctly, they were supposed to be here around 4:45, and they finally made it here, I think, around 8.
At the monument?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm glad I didn't go, because that would have been way past
the
time.
Yeah, because you're sitting there going, come on, where is he? Where is he? So I assume he probably had to stop and go very slow. You can't keep traveling in those conditions. But I didn't find out what time he came through Scottsbluff till the next day, because I thought, yesterday they were supposed to be here. Crap, Connor and I were going to go. So.
No, it was on my mind, but I mean, there was like, I went outside and there's dark clouds just coming down ahead. I'm like, I don't think that's going to work.
And it just kind of went out of my head. Maybe next year we'll remember to go.
They do come by. Yeah, they do this every year, right?
Yes. Yep.
When do they do the Oregon Trail reenactment? Because I don't think they do that every year. It's like every so many anniversaries.
I don't even know, because I've lived here since 2007, and only once have I known of anybody who did it, and it was a bunch of retired dudes. They're literally in their 70s and 80s. They hooked up their horses and donkeys.
Yep.
And just did the whole trail, and that's what they did all summer. They're like, this is what we're doing.
I remember as a kid, I think it was one of the anniversaries of the Oregon Trail. And it wasn't a small group. It was a large group of people with the wagons and everything.
I do know that this summer, I want to say sometime in July, I have to go to the OCTA website to find out. So OCTA is the Oregon California Trails Association. They're having their national conference. Here in
really?
Gearing. Yeah, they're going to meet. They're going to meet at. Nice. Yeah, they're going to meet at Legacy of the Plains and stuff. So
it's good to know people finally know how important we are.
Yeah, there you go. So maybe next year we'll remember to do that. And if I remember, I will try and get in touch with the former president, or not former, past president, because she would know, if they're planning any of that kind of stuff. Anyway. So there's a famous saying about the Platte, and I know we've covered it before, about why no one ever crossed it. It reportedly was first said by a 49er. The Platte River was too thick to drink and too thin to plow. The river's full of silt, and when silt is constantly wet, it can become quicksand, which means things like wagon wheels aren't going to work. You're going to get stuck, and even though there were river crossings, they could change, sometimes daily. People don't want to cross that. No. I don't want to cross it today knowing that there's silt in there because I don't want to get stuck, and I would probably get really ticked if I got unstuck and my shoe got left behind.
I think I already told you in the past about some of my stupid kid experiences.
Yes.
Where I did swim in that river a lot, much, and you shouldn't. I shouldn't have. I mean, really. I mean, there was a couple of close calls. I remember.
Well, you know what? It is called storytelling on the plains, and we could just sit and talk about all the stupid things we did as a kid, except for mine would have to be stupid things Irene did after she was 36 and moved to western Nebraska.
My parents subscribe to this. I don't think I can.
I'll protect you from your mom. I can take her. So anyway, we're not crossing the river unless it's necessary. It's too dangerous. And we've talked about this before, but you need to caulk the wagons and make several trips across. So if you're in that 100-wagon train...
Do you want to explain that? Because...
I'll let you explain it because you've done it before, and I suck at it.
I'm actually not quite sure myself. I know it's waterproofing the wagon. So they made like a little raft that they put
somehow
the wagon on. And these aren't boats. They're not very tall. They're just rafts, but they have the edges up
a little bit. And,
caulking prevented the river from basically coming up and capsizing or tipping one way or the other. But I don't know what they used for caulk.
I don't either.
That was I wondered if you knew, because I don't. I really don't know if it was some sort of, I would guess, animal fat, or if it was tar, or if it was lye. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I really don't know.
Yeah, and it makes me think of when I was in Tanzania and we had to cross a river. We went on a raft. And it was shady as hell. We drove our little car on there. Some dude had his moped, a couple people on bicycles, and I'm looking at my friend Hendrik, and I'm like, dude, are we going to make it across the river? We made it, but it was sketchy as all get out. Well, I'll have to show you a picture of it sometime.
This is and these rafts, that's another thing. I don't quite know what they did with them, how they constructed them, if they had to bring the material there. Because, there isn't a lot of lumber around here to use.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't imagine that there would be anything to make a raft with.
Yeah. I would assume you'd have to take this stuff with you, and if there's people... Because in the game, you pay somebody and they take you across. So I'm wondering if those folks were like
basically had ferrymen.
Yeah. So I'm thinking maybe they were out here, and then when the weather got bad enough, they went back to a fort or whatever. They had to have had some kind of home base for when the weather gets... I don't know. I don't know enough about that. That would...
That would be an interesting. That would be an interesting dive. Well, and was it because I could see the ferrymen just being ran by the military?
Could
Fort
be.
Robinson had to get across the river too. So
I don't know. And I just don't know enough about it.
I don't know. It brings up a lot of questions because you start playing that game, and then if you know this area, it's like, wait a second, where are you guys coming up with all this wood?
Yeah.
What are you, growing
have you been
trees?
out here?
Trees don't grow around here.
So you have Native Americans living in the area. Then the white man comes through, and with them come women and children, doctors, ministers, farmers, laborers, merchants, everything you need to get a town going out west. But Nebraska was not on their radar. This place was barren, and they were promised a gorgeous land of plenty. In 3 decades' time, everyone came through here, but didn't stop. The diaries are full of the potential of western Nebraska, and eventually people said, yeah, let's go there. Let's do this. And slowly but surely, little towns started popping up in western Nebraska. And we're going to stop here for now because... Connor, this is our longest one yet.
It has been.
It's an hour and 40 minutes.
It has been really good. It's been really interesting so far.
And we're going to get to the actual people next time. And I'm hoping by the time we're done with the next part, that I will have all my research done on the first marriage in Scottsbluff. And we can do that.
Yeah, that's right. I remember you got the
information. Yeah, you were sitting with me when you saw how giddy I get when I get all that information. I'm just a dork. And
once again, thank you to the Legacy of the Plains archivists. They were all wonderful. They're so friendly. I can't believe how wonderful they are. So thank you, because I'm sure Irene probably used a lot of you guys. For what we just talked about. So
a lot of my
a little shout out to Legacy of the Plains. Yep. Thank you.
And especially in some of the stuff from the next part is from the monument, but again, a lot of it was at Legacy. And some of it I pulled from some things I've written before, but most of it was from books and information that I found at Legacy. They're just an invaluable source of information for me, and I don't mind plugging it. They're a small museum, and they do rely a lot on donations.
They do. But for a small museum, I encourage anyone to come out here because it's worth seeing.
Yeah.
I almost think it's worth more seeing than the monument, personally. I mean, not that you're not going to see it anyway when you come up to the museum. It's kind of right there. But
And, you and I talk about how we would love to be able to do this as our full-time job, but I'd almost rather, if someone was going to give me $5 for doing this, give the $5 to Legacy.
Yeah.
And if you want, just say, hey, I heard about you on Irene's podcast. Or if they give it because of you, hey, I heard about it on Connor's podcast. I hate saying that. I'm like, it's Irene's podcast because it's our podcast. But, hey, I heard about it on Storytelling on the Plains, and I want to give you $5.
Yeah, and we encourage all our listeners, please donate to this museum. It's wonderful. It does so much for this community, and it keeps our heritage alive. Without it, I can't really imagine the state of this town without that museum, as far as just the history.
Yeah, where would that history be housed?
Exactly.
It'd be getting lost.
It would be lost in the archives somewhere in Lincoln.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And if you don't like museums and you don't like history, well, if you don't like history, why are you listening to us?
If you don't like museums and history, why are you listening to us?
Okay, I was trying to make some kind of connection about the fact that you can help feed the cats, man.
You can help the cats.
I also write for Inspire Today, and I interviewed a gentleman who volunteers down there, and he feeds the cats, the barn cats that are down there every single day. Very, very awesome story, which will be out in the July issue of Inspire Today.
Awesome.
We talk about the buildings and the dead people and the history, and Inspire Today talks about inspiring people in western Nebraska. So it kind of fits both of my little niches. I get to talk about the history that I love, and then I get to write about cool people that I love too. So we're hitting an hour and 45 minutes here, buddy. we should probably shut up.
All right. That's all for today, folks.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Storytelling on the Plains, a podcast about the history of western Nebraska. If you enjoyed this episode, visit our website, storytellingontheplains.com, where you can subscribe to the show through a variety of podcast hosts so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to support the podcast, visit patreon.com/storytellingontheplains, where you can get the episodes early and bonus content. You can also help promote the show by sharing the podcast with others, posting social media, or leaving us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, thanks for listening to Storytelling on the Plains.